Montana Territory, 1875. The sun cast long shadows across Whispering Pines Ranch as Mitchell Blackett stood on his weathered porch, his wheat-colored hair tousled by the morning breeze. At 25, the lines etching his forehead seemed out of place on his youthful face, the unmistakable mark of a man who'd shouldered responsibility far beyond his years. Pa, look what I found. 4-year-old Thomas came barreling across the yard, clutching something in his small hands. Behind him, 2-year-old Emma toddled along, her chubby legs working double time to keep up with her brother. Mitchell crouched down, his tired eyes brightening at the sight of his children. What have you got there, son? A rock shaped like a horse. Thomas opened his dirt-stained palms to reveal a small stone that, with considerable imagination, resembled a horse. Well, would you look at that? Mitchell said, ruffling his son's hair, the same golden shade as his own. Quite the find. Emma reached them, immediately raising her arms. Up, Pa. Mitchell scooped her up, balancing her on his hip with practiced ease. The weight of her, slight as it was, reminded him of all he carried. A ranch to run, 2 young children to raise, and a gaping hole in their lives where Clara should have been. Mr. Blackett, old Henry, the ranch hand who'd taken to watching the children when Mitchell couldn't, waved from the corral. Stage is coming. Mitchell's stomach tightened. The stagecoach meant the arrival of his new cook, a necessity he'd put off hiring for too long. Clara had been gone nearly a year now, taken by the fever that swept through the valley last spring. He'd managed the cooking himself since then, producing meals that were edible, if not appetizing. But with Roundup approaching and the children growing more demanding by the day, something had to give. He set Emma down gently. Henry, would you mind taking the children for a spell? Our new cook will be arriving. As the stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust, Mitchell straightened his worn blue shirt and ran a hand through his hair. He'd requested a middle-aged widow from the employment agency in Helena, someone maternal who could cook and help with the children. Practical, sensible, safe. The coach door swung open, and Mitchell froze. She was young, startlingly so. 22, perhaps 23. Certainly not the matronly presence he'd expected. She stepped down gracefully, her emerald green traveling dress hugging a slender waist before flowing outward. A small hat perched atop rich auburn hair that glinted copper in the sunlight. Mr. Blackett? Her voice carried across the yard, clear as a bell. Mitchell cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. I'm Sophia Lockhart. She approached with confident strides, extending a gloved hand. Your new cook. Mitchell took her hand, acutely aware of his calloused palm against her fine gloves. There must be some mistake. I specifically requested a cook with experience in family situations. She withdrew her hand and smiled, revealing a dimple in her right cheek. I assure you, Mr. Blackett, I am quite capable. Before Mitchell could respond, Thomas broke free from Henry's grasp and ran toward them. Are you our new ma? Mitchell's face burned. Thomas, that's not. I'm your new cook, Sophia answered, crouching to the boy's level. Her skirts pooled around her in a circle of green. Which means I'll be making your meals. What's your favorite food? Apple pie, Thomas declared. Then we shall have to make some together sometime. She smiled at the boy before rising to face Mitchell again. I understand if you're concerned, Mr. Blackett. The agency mentioned you requested someone older, but I was the only one available with the necessary skills. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. Miss Lockhart, this is a working ranch. The conditions are primitive, demanding. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, Mr. Blackett. I'm no stranger to hard work. Something flickered in her eyes. Determination, perhaps, or desperation. All I ask is a 2-week trial. If you're dissatisfied with my cooking or my conduct, I'll leave without complaint. Mitchell studied her face. Beneath her composure, he sensed something hidden, a secret or sorrow she kept carefully guarded. He recognized the look because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. 2 weeks, he agreed finally. The children and I have simple tastes, Miss Lockhart. Nothing fancy required. Thank you, Mr. Blackett. Relief softened her features. I won't disappoint you. As Mitchell helped unload her trunk from the stagecoach, he couldn't shake the feeling that his orderly, if lonely, existence had just been irrevocably disrupted. What secrets was Sophia Lockhart hiding behind those clear green eyes? And why would a young, beautiful woman choose to bury herself on an isolated ranch with a widower and his 2 small children? He would soon discover the answers would change everything. Sophia's first morning at Whispering Pines Ranch began before dawn. She stoked the kitchen fire and set about making a proper breakfast, something the kitchen clearly hadn't seen in months. The sparse pantry told a story of a family subsisting on the bare necessities. As she worked, Sophia's mind wandered to the letter tucked safely in her trunk upstairs, the one she'd read so many times the folds were beginning to tear. The letter that had brought her here, to the middle of nowhere Montana territory, to work for a man she'd never met. The kitchen door creaked open, and Mitchell Blackett entered, looking surprised to find her already at work. The golden light of dawn softened his features, highlighting cheekbones that could have been carved from marble. Without his hat, his blonde hair fell across his forehead in a boyish manner that belied the serious set of his jaw. "You're up early," he said, moving to pour himself coffee from the pot she'd prepared. "Early hours are part of a cook's job, Mr. Blackett." Sophia turned back to the biscuits she was cutting. "Breakfast will be ready shortly." Mitchell leaned against the counter, watching her work. "The children usually have porridge." "They'll have porridge as well," she assured him, "along with eggs, biscuits, and bacon. Growing children need proper nourishment." A shadow crossed his face. "We've managed." "I'm sure you have." Sophia placed the biscuits in the oven, then turned to face him fully. "Mr. Blackett, I didn't mean to imply. No offense taken, Miss Lockhart." He sipped his coffee, his blue eyes studying her over the rim of his cup. "You're right about the children needing proper meals. That's why you're here." The simple statement hung between them, laden with all he hadn't said, that a mother should be making those meals, that he'd failed to provide what his children needed, that bringing a stranger into their home was an admission of that failure. "Pa!" Thomas burst into the kitchen, still in his nightshirt, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Henry says the new foal is standing up." Mitchell's expression softened immediately. "Is that so? Well, we'd better go see, hadn't we? Can I come?" Emma appeared behind her brother, clutching a rag doll to her chest. Unlike Thomas, with his father's coloring, Emma had dark hair and eyes that must have come from her mother. "Of course, sweetheart." Mitchell set down his coffee cup. "Let's get you both dressed first." "I can help," Sophia offered, then hesitated when Mitchell's expression shuttered closed. "That won't be necessary, Miss Lockhart. We have a routine." He ushered the children out, then paused at the door. "Breakfast at 7? "Yes, Mr. Blackett." After they left, Sophia leaned against the counter, exhaling slowly. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but the wall Mitchell Blackett had erected around himself and his children seemed nearly impenetrable. How could she possibly fulfill her promise when the man barely allowed her near his children? The letter in her trunk seemed to call to her, a reminder of why she'd come, why she had to stay, no matter how unwelcome she might feel. When the Blackett family returned for breakfast, the transformation in the dining room stopped them in their tracks. The table, usually bare save for mismatched plates, now bore a checkered cloth Sophia had found in a drawer. Wildflowers stood in a mason jar at the center, and the plates were heaped with food that sent fragrant steam into the air. "It smells like heaven," Thomas declared, climbing into his chair without waiting for permission. Mitchell's expression remained guarded, but Sophia didn't miss how his gaze lingered on the flowers, a flash of something like pain crossing his features before he masked it. "This is very nice, Miss Lockhart, but there's no need for such fuss on ordinary days." "It's hardly a fuss, Mr. Blackett." Sophia helped Emma into her chair, pretending not to notice how the little girl's eyes widened at the sight of the golden biscuits. "A pleasant setting aids digestion. At least, that's what my mother always said." As they ate, Sophia watched the family interact. Mitchell was gentle with his children, but reserved, as if holding part of himself apart even from them. The children, starved for attention, competed for his notice with increasingly loud stories and questions. "Miss Sophia, why is your hair that color?" Thomas asked between mouthfuls of egg. "It looks like the copper pot in the kitchen." Sophia laughed. "I suppose it does. I got it from my grandmother. Our ma had dark hair, like Emma." Thomas continued. "Pa says I look like him, but Emma looks like Ma." Mitchell set down his fork. "Thomas, that's enough talk about. It's all right to talk about her," Sophia said gently. "Children need to remember." The look Mitchell gave her could have frozen water. "With all due respect, Miss Lockhart, you don't know what my children need." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sophia busied herself helping Emma cut her biscuit, while Mitchell stared into his coffee as if it contained answers to questions he couldn't voice. "These are the best biscuits I ever ate," Thomas finally announced, breaking the tension. "Even better than Ma's." Mitchell's head snapped up, but before he could reprimand the boy, Sophia smiled warmly at Thomas. "Thank you, but I'm sure your mothers were wonderful in their own way. Perhaps different, but special because she made them with love." Something in Mitchell's rigid posture eased slightly. He gave her a barely perceptible nod before returning to his meal. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And Sophia Lockhart had come too far to be discouraged by a difficult beginning. The mystery she carried with her, however, grew heavier by the day. A week passed in much the same manner. Sophia cooked meals that gradually coaxed color back into the children's cheeks. She cleaned the ranch house until it gleamed, organized the pantry, and even planted a small kitchen garden with seeds she'd brought from Pennsylvania. Mitchell watched her transformation of his home with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Each improvement seemed to highlight what had been missing since Clara's death, not just a woman's touch, but joy, laughter. The children responded to Sophia as flowers to the sun, turning toward her natural warmth. "Pa, Miss Sophia says she'll teach me to make cookies tomorrow," Thomas announced one evening as Mitchell tucked him into bed. "That's nice," Mitchell replied automatically, smoothing the boy's blanket. "And she knows stories about knights and dragons. She does different voices for each character." Mitchell's hands stilled. Clara had told those stories, with those same voices. "Where did she learn those stories, son?" Thomas shrugged. "Don't know, but she said she knows lots more." After the children were asleep, Mitchell found Sophia in the kitchen, kneading dough for the next morning's bread. The lamplight cast a golden glow over her, highlighting the copper strands in her auburn hair. She'd rolled up her sleeves, and flour dusted her forearms. "You're still working," he observed, stepping into the warm kitchen. Sophia looked up, a strand of hair falling across her cheek. "Bread waits for no one, Mr. Blackett." She smiled, that dimple appearing in her right cheek. "Was there something you needed?" Mitchell leaned against the doorframe, suddenly uncertain why he'd sought her out. "Thomas mentioned you've been telling him stories. About knights and dragons." Something flickered in her eyes. Caution, perhaps. "Yes, children love stories. My wife used to tell those same stories, with different voices for each character." Sophia's hands stilled in the dough. "Many mothers tell such tales, Mr. Blackett. They're quite common. Not with the voices. Clara had a special way." He trailed off, watching Sophia's expression carefully. She resumed kneading, her movements more deliberate. "Perhaps it's a coincidence. Or perhaps your son described his mother's storytelling, and I naturally adapted to what he was used to." She glanced up. Children find comfort in the familiar, especially after loss. The explanation was reasonable, yet Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia was hiding something. Her appearance at his ranch, her immediate connection with his children, the familiar way she seemed to know exactly what they needed. It all felt somehow orchestrated. "Miss Lockhart, you've been here a week now. You've done excellent work. The children are clearly fond of you." She smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you. I'm quite fond of them as well. Yet I can't help feeling there's something you're not telling me." Mitchell stepped closer, close enough to see the fine dusting of freckles across her nose. "Why did you really come to Whispering Pines?" Sophia's hands stilled again. For a moment, he thought she might confess whatever secret she harbored. Instead, she carefully shaped the dough into a loaf and placed it in a bread pan. "The employment agency sent me, Mr. Blackett. I needed work, and you needed a cook." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It's as simple as that." Nothing about Sophia Lockhart seemed simple. The graceful way she moved through his home, as if she belonged there. The tender patience she showed his children. The sadness that sometimes shadowed her eyes when she thought no one was watching. 2 days remain in our agreed trial period," Mitchell said, stepping back. "If you still wish to stay after that, the position is yours permanently." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "The children mentioned you'll be starting roundups soon." "Next week. I'll be away from the ranch for days at a time. They'll miss you terribly." She said it matter-of-factly, but there was a note of something more in her voice. Concern, perhaps, or understanding. "They're used to it. Children never get used to missing their father, Mr. Blackett." The simple truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. How many times had he left them with old Henry or neighboring ranch wives, telling himself they were fine, they understood, when their small faces had clearly shown otherwise. "I don't have much choice," he said, more defensively than he'd intended. "The ranch doesn't run itself." "No, it doesn't," she agreed. "But perhaps there are ways to make the separation easier on them. Letters for Henry to read to them each night. Small tokens you leave behind for them to find. Little reminders that even when you're gone, you're thinking of them." Mitchell stared at her, struck by the practical tenderness of her suggestions. "You sound like you've done this before." Something like pain flashed across her features before she composed herself. "I helped raise my younger siblings after our mother died. My father was often away working." It was the most personal information she'd shared since arriving, and Mitchell sensed there was much more to the story than she was telling. "I'll think about your suggestions," he said finally. "Good night, Miss Lockhart." "Good night, Mr. Blackett." As he walked back to his bedroom, Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia Lockhart knew far more about him and his children than she should, as if she'd been preparing for this role long before she arrived at Whispering Pines Ranch. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory stirred. Clara, in her final feverish days, extracting a promise from him that he couldn't quite recall. The next morning, Mitchell rose before dawn and headed to the barn, his mind still turning over his conversation with Sophia. The mysteries surrounding her seemed to multiply rather than diminish, yet he couldn't deny the positive changes she'd brought to his home and children. As he saddled his horse for the day's work, he heard a soft voice coming from the hayloft. Curious, he climbed the ladder quietly, peering over the edge. Sophia sat cross-legged in the hay, her skirts arranged modestly around her, writing in a small notebook. Tears streamed silently down her face as she wrote, occasionally pausing to wipe them away with her sleeve. Mitchell hesitated, feeling like an intruder on her private grief. He was about to retreat when she spoke aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying, Clara. I promised you I would, but he's so guarded. The children are warming to me, but Mitchell, I don't know if he'll ever trust me enough to let me fulfill my promise to you." Mitchell froze, his blood running cold. "Clara? His Clara?" Sophia closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest, her next words striking him like lightning. "I'll keep my word, sister. Your children will know how much you love them." "Sister." The word echoed in Mitchell's mind as pieces fell into place with dizzying speed. Clara had mentioned a younger sister once or twice, an auburn-haired beauty who'd moved east with their father after their parents' divorce. Sophia, Clara's sister, whom she hadn't seen in years. The sister who would now be about 22 years old. Mitchell's foot slipped, sending a shower of hay down to the barn floor below. Sophia gasped, jumping to her feet. "Mr. Blackett." Her face paled as she hastily wiped away her tears. "I didn't realize anyone was here." Mitchell climbed fully into the loft, his heart pounding. "You're Clara's sister." It wasn't a question. Sophia's wide eyes and trembling lips confirmed the truth before she spoke. "Yes." The word came out barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me?" Anger and confusion warred within him. "Why come here under false pretenses? Would you have hired me if you'd known?" Sophia challenged, finding her voice. "Would you have let Clara's estranged sister into your home, into your children's lives?" The truth of her words stung. No, he wouldn't have. The pain of Clara's loss was still too raw, the memories too precious to share with someone who'd been absent from her life for years. "What promise?" he demanded. "You mentioned a promise to Clara." Sophia clutched her notebook tighter. "I wrote to her, after learning of her marriage. We began corresponding in secret. She forgave me for staying with our father after the divorce. We were rebuilding our relationship through letters when she fell ill. She never told me. She was going to, when the time was right." Sophia's voice cracked. "Her last letter asked me to come, but by the time I received it and made arrangements, she was all ready." She couldn't finish the sentence. "That doesn't explain why you're here now, a year later, pretending to be someone you're not." Sophia's chin lifted, reminiscent of Clara's stubborn determination. "I received a final letter after her death, posted by the doctor at her request. She asked me to check on her children, to make sure they were thriving. She worried about you, Mitchell, about your tendency to withdraw when hurt." Mitchell flinched at the accuracy of Clara's concern. "That still doesn't explain the deception. I wrote to you first as myself. 3 times. You never responded." Her green eyes, so different from Clara's brown ones yet equally expressive, held his gaze steadily. I made a promise to my dying sister that I would make sure her children knew how much she loved them, that they would grow up with stories of her, with the recipes she cherished, with the traditions that were important to her. So you tricked your way into my home. The sense of betrayal was acute, sharpened by the realization that he'd begun to trust Sophia, perhaps even to care for her. I did what I had to do to keep my promise. Sophia straightened her shoulders. Judge me if you must, but I've brought warmth back to your home. I've made your children smile again. I've shared pieces of their mother with them in ways only family could. Mitchell turned away, unable to argue with the truth of her words. The past week had indeed brought light back into his home, easing a darkness he'd almost grown accustomed to. The 2 weeks are nearly up, he said finally. You should pack your things. Sophia's sharp intake of breath made him turn back to her. The hurt in her eyes mirrored what he felt in his own heart. Mitchell, please. Don't punish the children for my deception. Don't use my children to manipulate me, he countered. You lied, Miss Lockhart. Whatever your intentions, you began our acquaintance with dishonesty. And if I had told you the truth from the beginning, would you have given me the chance to fulfill my promise to Clara? To help heal this family she loved so deeply? Mitchell had no answer that wouldn't reveal his own failings, his inability to move forward, his stubborn grip on grief, his fear of allowing anyone new into the fragile world he'd built around his children. Be packed by tomorrow morning. The stage comes through at noon. He turned and descended the ladder, ignoring the soft sound of her weeping above him. As he mounted his horse and rode out to the far pasture, Mitchell couldn't escape the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. But pride and pain drove him forward, away from the woman who'd brought both comfort and confusion into his life. Behind in the barn loft, Sophia opened her notebook once more, adding a final entry to the journal she'd been keeping for Clara's children, a record of their daily lives, their growth, their small triumphs that their mother would never witness. A legacy she'd hoped to give them when they were old enough to understand. Now, it seemed, they would never read it. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Mitchell's mood. He'd spent a restless night, his conscience battling with his pride. Every logical argument for sending Sophia away was countered by the memory of his children's laughter as she taught them to make biscuits, or the way Emma had stopped having nightmares since Sophia began telling her bedtime stories. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He would allow Sophia to stay, not as a deception, but openly as Clara's sister. The children deserved to know their aunt, to have that connection to their mother. But when he entered the kitchen, expecting to find Sophia preparing breakfast as usual, he found only cold ashes in the stove. A folded piece of paper sat on the table, his name written on the outside in an elegant hand. Mitchell's stomach tightened as he unfolded the letter. Dear Mitchell, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I realized last night that my presence causes you pain, reopening wounds that have barely begun to heal. That was never my intention. I came to Whispering Pines believing I could fulfill my promise to Clara while bringing comfort to her family. Perhaps that was presumptuous. Perhaps some promises cannot be kept in the way we imagine. I've left before dawn to spare us both the awkwardness of a formal goodbye. Please tell Thomas and Emma that their Aunt Sophia loves them very much, and that their mother loved them even more. I've left something for them in the cupboard above the stove, Clara's recipe book, which she sent to me during our correspondence. It contains notes in her hand about each dish, memories of cooking for her family, and hopes for traditions you might continue. It belongs with her children. Forgive me for the deception, Mitchell. I truly believed it was the only way to honor my sister's final wish. With deepest regrets. Sophia Lockhart. Mitchell read the letter twice, then set it down with shaking hands. She was gone. He'd driven her away with his anger, his inability to see past his own pain to the gift she'd been offering his family, a connection to Clara that he couldn't provide himself. He moved to the cupboard and found the recipe book, bound in faded blue cloth. Opening it, he immediately recognized Clara's flowing handwriting. Notes filled the margins. Mitchell loves this with extra cinnamon. Made this the day Thomas took his first steps. Emma's favorite. She always asks for seconds. A sob caught in his throat as he turned the pages, finding memories preserved in Clara's hand that he'd never known existed. This was her legacy to their children. Not just recipes, but stories of their family, moments of their early lives that might otherwise have been forgotten. And he'd nearly let it leave with Sophia. Pa. Thomas stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Where's Miss Sophia? The stove's cold. Mitchell closed the recipe book gently. She had to leave, son. Leave? Thomas's eyes widened. But she said she'd teach me to make cookies today. Is Miss Sophia gone? Emma appeared behind her brother, her doll clutched to her chest. She promised to fix Dolly's dress. The hurt in their voices was like a knife to Mitchell's heart. In just 1 week, Sophia had woven herself into the fabric of their lives, filling spaces he hadn't even realized were empty. Mitchell hesitated, then knelt before his children. Miss Sophia is your Aunt Sophia, your mother's sister. Thomas's mouth fell open. We have an aunt. Yes. And she came here because she promised your mother she would look after you both. Then why did she leave? Thomas demanded, his young face screwed up in confusion. Doesn't she love us? She loves you very much, Mitchell said, his throat tight. But I made a mistake. I was angry that she didn't tell me who she was right away. That's a silly reason to make her go away, Emma said with a child's straightforward logic. Mitchell looked at his daughter, so like Clara in her certainty of what was right. Yes, he agreed softly. It was very silly of me. He stood up abruptly, making a decision. Get dressed quickly. Both of you. Why, Pa? Thomas asked, already running for his room. Because we're going to catch that stagecoach before it leaves town. 20 minutes later, they were in the wagon, racing down the muddy road toward Bailey Creek, the nearest town with a stagecoach stop. The drizzle had turned to a steady rain, soaking them despite the canvas cover Mitchell had hastily erected over the wagon. Will Aunt Sophia come back with us? Emma asked, her small face hopeful beneath the blanket Mitchell had wrapped around her. I hope so, sweetheart. Mitchell snapped the reins, urging the horses faster. I surely hope so. They reached Bailey Creek just as the stagecoach was being loaded. Mitchell scanned the small crowd, his heart sinking when he didn't see Sophia's distinctive auburn hair. Pa, look. Thomas pointed toward the small hotel across from the stage depot. Is that her? Mitchell turned to see a figure in a dark green traveling dress emerge from the hotel door, a small carpet bag in hand. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking Sophia's graceful posture and gleaming hair, now darkened by the rain. Stay here, he told the children, jumping down from the wagon. He crossed the muddy street in long strides, reaching Sophia just as she approached the stagecoach. Miss Lockhart, he called. She turned, surprise widening her eyes. Mr. Blackett? What are you doing here? Stopping you from making a terrible mistake. Mitchell stepped closer, heedless of the rain soaking through his coat. Or rather, stopping me from making one. Sophia glanced toward the waiting stagecoach, then back to Mitchell. I don't understand. I was wrong, Mitchell said simply. I was hurt and angry, and I let pride get in the way of what's best for my children. For our family. Our family, Sophia repeated, uncertainty in her voice. Clara's family, Mitchell clarified. Which includes you, her sister. He took a deep breath. The children need you, Sophia. They need the connection to their mother that only you can provide. Sophia's eyes filled with tears that mingled with the raindrops on her cheeks. You don't resent my presence? The reminder of what you've lost. You're not just a reminder of what we've lost, Mitchell said, suddenly understanding the truth of it himself. You're a gift. A piece of Clara that came back to us when we needed it most. Pa. Thomas's voice carried across the street. He and Emma had ignored Mitchell's instruction to stay in the wagon and were now running toward them, splashing through puddles. Aunt Sophia, Emma cried, reaching them first and throwing her arms around Sophia's skirts. Pa says you're our aunt. Sophia knelt, heedless of the mud soaking her fine dress, and gathered Emma into her arms. Yes, sweetheart. I'm your mother's sister. Why didn't you tell us? Thomas demanded, skidding to a stop beside them. Sophia looked up at Mitchell, uncertainty in her gaze. He nodded encouragingly. I was afraid, she admitted to Thomas. Afraid that if you knew who I was, it might make your father sad. And I didn't want to do that. Pa's already sad lots of times, Thomas said with a child's brutal honesty. But he laughs more when you're around. Mitchell felt heat rise to his face despite the cool rain. The observation was startlingly accurate. He had laughed more in the past week than in the entire year before. Will you come home with us? Emma asked, her small hand touching Sophia's wet cheek. Please. Sophia looked up at Mitchell, questions in her eyes that he couldn't answer with words alone. Instead, he extended his hand to help her to her feet. Whispering Pines is your home now, if you want it to be, he said softly. Not as our cook, but as Clara's sister. As Thomas and Emma's aunt. And as what to you, Mitchell? Sophia asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. The question caught him off guard. What was Sophia to him? A week ago, she'd been a stranger. Now she was family. Yes, but something else too. Something he wasn't ready to name, but couldn't deny. A second chance, he answered finally. For all of us. Sophia's smile bloomed slowly, that dimple appearing in her cheek. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her up. I left Clara's recipe book for you, she said. I found it, Mitchell replied. It's what made me realize what I was throwing away. The stagecoach driver called for final boarding. Sophia glanced at it, then back at the Blackett family standing before her in the rain. Mitchell with his golden hair plastered to his forehead, the children with their hopeful faces turned up to her. Well, Miss Lockhart, Mitchell asked, what will it be? Are you coming home with us? Sophia squeezed his hand, her answer clear in the warmth of her touch. Yes, Mr. Blackett. I'm coming home. 6 months later, Whispering Pines Ranch glowed with warmth and light as Sophia put the finishing touches on Christmas dinner. The scent of roast turkey, apple pie, and cinnamon filled the kitchen, all made from Clara's recipes, with Sophia's own touches added. Thomas burst through the door, his cheeks red from the cold. Pa says everything's ready. Can we eat now? Almost, Sophia laughed, ruffling his hair. Tell your father and sister to wash up. Dinner in 5 minutes. As Thomas raced back outside to the barn, where Mitchell and Emma were finishing the evening chores, Sophia glanced around the kitchen that had become truly hers over the past months. Herbs hung drying from the rafters. New curtains brightened the windows. Clara's recipe book sat open on the counter, its pages now supplemented with Sophia's own notes and memories. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. There had been moments of tension as they all adjusted to their new roles. Times when grief resurfaced unexpectedly. Days when Mitchell withdrew into silence, struggling with guilt over finding happiness again. But there had also been moments of pure joy. Emma calling Sophia Auntie for the first time. Thomas proudly presenting her with wildflowers, just because. Mitchell's hand finding hers during evening walks around the property. And gradually, something new had blossomed between them, something neither had expected but both had come to cherish. The door opened again, admitting Mitchell and Emma in a swirl of snowy air. Mitchell stomped his boots on the mat, his gaze immediately finding Sophia's across the room. The tenderness in his blue eyes still had the power to make her breath catch. Something smells amazing, he said, helping Emma out of her coat. Aunt Sophia made all Mama's special Christmas dishes, Emma announced. She showed me the recipes in the book. Did she now? Mitchell crossed the kitchen to stand beside Sophia, close enough that she could feel the cold emanating from his coat. I'm sure your mother would be pleased. I hope so, Sophia said softly. I've tried to honor her traditions, while creating some of our own, Mitchell added. His hand found the small of her back, a casual touch that spoke of growing intimacy. After the children were settled at the table, Mitchell cleared his throat. Before we eat, I have something to say. He glanced at Sophia, a mixture of nervousness and determination in his expression. These past months have been a time of healing for our family. Sophia has brought Clara's memories back to life for the children, while helping all of us move forward. Sophia felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. It's been my privilege, she said simply. More than that, Mitchell continued. She's brought joy and laughter back to Whispering Pines. She's become essential to our happiness. He took a deep breath, which is why, with the children's blessing, I've asked Sophia to become more than just the children's aunt. Thomas bounced in his seat. Tell her the rest, Pa. Mitchell reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band with a single pearl. Sophia Lockhart, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of officially becoming part of this family you've already saved in so many ways. Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes. She'd come to Whispering Pines to fulfill a promise to her sister, never imagining she would find her own happiness in the process. Never dreaming that the grief-stricken widower would come to look at her with such love in his eyes. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Mitchell. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia felt Clara's presence surround them, not as a sorrowful ghost, but as a blessing. Her sister had sent her here, knowing somehow that in healing the Blackett family, Sophia would heal herself as well. Mitchell pulled her close, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "Merry Christmas, Sophia." "Merry Christmas," she replied, looking at the family gathered around her, her family now. The secret recipe for love, it seemed, had been waiting at Whispering Pines all along, needing only the right ingredients to bring it to life. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, a clean page on which to write their future together.